Welcome. Step into a world where stories breathe through my voice. Leave everything behind, find your perfect spot, and let's begin.
I remember the whole beginning as a succession of flights and drops, a little seesaw of the right throbs and the wrong. After rising in town to meet his appeal, I had at all events a couple of very bad days. Found myself doubtful again, felt indeed sure I had made a mistake. In this state of mind, I spent the long hours of bumping, swinging coach that carried me to the stopping place, at which I was to be met by a vehicle from the house. This convenience, I was told, had been ordered, and I found, toward the close of the June afternoon, a commodious fly-in waiting for me. Driving at that hour on a lovely day through a country to which the summer's sweetness seemed to offer me a friendly welcome, my fortitude mounted afresh. As we turned into the avenue, encountered a reprieve that was probably but a proof of the point to which it had sunk. I suppose I had expected, or had dreaded, something so melancholy that what greeted me was a good surprise. I remember as a most pleasant impression the broad, clear front, its open windows and fresh curtains, and a pair of maids looking out. I remember the lawn, and the bright flowers, and the crunch of my wheels on the gravel, and the clustered treetops over which the rooks circled and cawed in the golden sky. The scene had a greatness that made it a different affair from my own scant home, and there immediately appeared at the door with a little girl in her hand, a civil person who dropped me as decent a curtsy as if I had been the mistress or a distinguished visitor. I had received in Harley Street a narrower notion of the place, and that, as I recalled it, made me think the proprietor still more of a gentleman, suggested that what I was to enjoy might be something beyond his promise. I had no drop again till the next day, for I was carried triumphantly through the following hours by my introduction to the younger of my pupils. The little girl who accompanied Mrs. Gross appeared to me on the spot a creature so charming as to make it a great fortune to have to do with her. She was the most beautiful child I had ever seen, and afterward wondered that my employer had not told me more of her. I slept little that night. I was too much excited, and this astonished me, too, I recollect, remained with me, adding to my sense of the liberality with which I was treated. The large, impressive room, one of the best in the house. The great state bed, as I almost felt it, the full-figured draperies, the long glasses in which for the first time I could see myself from head to foot, all struck me like the extraordinary charm of my small charge, as so many things thrown in. It was thrown in as well from the first moment that I should get on with Mrs. Gross in a relation over which, on my way in the coach, I fear I had rather brooded. The only thing, indeed, in this early outlook might have made me shrink again was the clear circumstance of her being so glad to see me. I perceived within half an hour that she was so glad, stout, simple, plain, clean, wholesome woman, as to be positively on her guard against showing it too much. I wondered even then a little why she should wish not to show it, and that, with reflection, with suspicion, might of course have made me uneasy. But it was a comfort that there could be no uneasiness in a connection with anything so beatific as the radiant image of my little girl, the vision of whose angelic beauty had probably more than anything else to do with the restlessness that before morning made me several times rise and wander about my room to take in the whole picture and prospect, to watch from my open window the faint summer dawn, to look at such portions of the rest of the house as I could catch, and to listen while in the fading dusk the first birds begin to twitter for the possible recurrence of a sound or two less natural and not without, but within, that I had fancied I heard. There had been a moment when I believed I recognized faint and far the cry of a child. There had been another when I found myself just consciously starting, as at the passage before my door, of a light footstep. But these fancies were not marked enough not to be thrown off, and it is only in the light or the gloom, I should rather say, of other and subsequent matters, that they now come back to me. To watch teach form little Flora would too evidently be the making of a happy and useful life. It had been agreed between us downstairs that after this first occasion I should have her as a matter of course at night, a small white bed being already arranged to that end in my room. What I had undertaken was the whole care of her, and she had remained just this last time with Mrs. Gross only as an effect of our consideration for my inevitable strangeness and her natural timidity. In spite of this timidity, which the child herself, in the oddest way in the world, had been perfectly frank and brave about, allowing it without a sign of uncomfortable consciousness, with the deep, sweet serenity, indeed, of one of Raphael's holy infants, to be discussed, to be imputed to her, and to determine us, I feel quite sure she would presently like me. It was part of what I already liked Mrs. Gross herself for, the pleasure I could see her feel in my admiration and wonder as I sat at supper with 4 tall candles and with my pupil in a high chair and bib brightly facing me, between them over bread and milk. There were naturally things that in Flora's presence could pass between us only as prodigious and gratified looks, obscure and roundabout allusions. And the little boy, does he look like her? Is he too so very remarkable? One wouldn't flatter a child. Oh, miss, most remarkable, if you think well of this one. And she stood there with a plate in her hand, beaming at our companion, who looked from one of us to the other, with placid, heavenly eyes that contained nothing to check us. Yes, if I do, you will be carried away by the little gentleman. Well, that, I think, is what I came for, to be carried away. I'm afraid, however, I remember feeling the impulse to add, I'm rather easily carried away. I was carried away in London. I can still see Mrs. Gross's broad face as she took this in. In Harley Street. In Harley Street. Well, miss, you're not the first, and you won't be the last. Oh, I've no pretension, I could laugh, to being the only one. My other pupil, at any rate, as I understand, comes back tomorrow. Not tomorrow, Friday, miss. He arrives, as you did, by the coach under care of the guard, and is to be met by the same carriage. I forthwith expressed that the proper, as well as the pleasant and friendly thing, would be therefore that on the arrival of the public conveyance I should be in waiting for him with his little sister, an idea in which Mrs. Gross concurred so heartily that I somehow took her manner as a kind of comforting pledge, never falsified, thank heaven, that we should on every question be quite at one. Oh, she was glad I was there. What I felt the next day was, I suppose, nothing that could fairly be called a reaction from the cheer of my arrival. It was probably at the most only a slight oppression, produced by a fuller measure of the scale, as I walked round them, gazed up at them, took them in, of my new circumstances. They had, as it were, an extent and mass for which I had not been prepared, and in the presence of which I found myself freshly a little scared as well as a little proud. Lessons in this agitation certainly suffered some delay. I reflected that my first duty was, by the gentlest arts I could contrive, to win the child into the sense of knowing me. I spent the day with her out of doors. I arranged with her, to her great satisfaction, that it should be she only, who might show me the place. She showed it step by step and room by room and secret by secret, with droll, delightful, childish talk about it, and with the result in half an hour of our becoming immense friends. Young as she was, I was struck throughout our little tour with her confidence and courage, with the way in empty chambers and dull corridors, on crooked staircases that made me pause, and even on the summit of an old maculated square tower that made me feel dizzy, her morning music, her disposition to tell me so many more things than she asked, rang out and led me on. I have not seen Bly since the day I left it, and I dare say that to my older and more informed eyes it would now appear sufficiently contracted, but as my little conductress, with her hair of gold and a frock of blue, danced before me round corners and pattered down passages, I had the view of a castle of romance inhabited by a rosy sprite, such a place as would somehow, for diversion of the young idea, take all colour out of storybooks and fairy tales. Wasn't it just a storybook over which I had fallen a doze and a dream? No, it was a big, ugly, antique, but convenient house, embodying a few features of a building still older, half replaced and half utilized, in which I had the fancy of our being almost as lost as a handful of passengers in a great drifting ship, while I was strangely at the helm. Chapter 2. This came home to me when 2 days later I drove over with Flora to meet, as Mrs. Gross said, the little gentleman, and all the more for an incident that, presenting itself the second evening, had deeply disconcerted me. The first day had been on the whole, as I have expressed, reassuring, but I was to see it wind up in keen apprehension. The post bag that evening, it came late, contained a letter for me, which, however, in the hand of my employer, I found to be composed but of a few words enclosing another, addressed to himself with the seal still unbroken. This I recognise is from the headmaster, and the headmaster's an awful bore. Read him, please, deal with him, but mind you don't report, not a word. I'm off. I broke the seal with a great effort, so great a one that I was a long time coming to it, took the unopened missive at last up to my room, and only attacked it just before going to bed. I had better have let it wait till the morning, for it gave me a second sleepless night. With no counsel to take the next day, I was full of distress, and it finally got so the better of me that I determined to open myself at least to Mrs. Gross. "What does it mean? The child dismissed his school?" She gave me a look that I remarked at the moment, then, visibly, with a quick blankness, seemed to try to take it back. "But aren't they all? Sent home, yes, but only for the holidays. Miles may never go back at all." Consciously under my attention, she reddened. "They won't take him. They absolutely decline." At this she raised her eyes, which she had turned from me. I saw them fill with good tears. "What has he done?" I hesitated, then I judged best to simply hand her the letter, which, however, had the effect of making her, without taking it, simply put her hands behind her. She shook her head sadly. "Such things are not for me, miss." My counsellor couldn't read. I winced at my mistake, which I attenuated as I could, and opened my letter again to repeat it to her. Then, faltering in the act, and folding it up once more, I put it back in my pocket. "Is he really bad?" The tears were still in her eyes. "Do the gentlemen say so?" "They go into no particulars. They simply express their regret that it should be impossible to keep him. That can only have one meaning." Mrs. Gross listened with dumb emotion. She forbore to ask me what this meaning might be, so that presently, to put the thing with some coherence, and with the mere aid of her presence to my own mind, I went on, "that he's an injury to the others." At this, with one of the quick turns of simple folk, she suddenly flamed up. "Master Miles, him an injury?" There was such a flood of good faith in it, that though I had not yet seen the child, my very fears made me jump to the absurdity of the idea. I found myself, to meet my friend the better, offering it on the spot sarcastically to his poor little innocent mates. "It's too dreadful," cried Mrs. Gross, "to say such cruel things. Why, he's scarce 10 years old." Yes, it would be incredible. She was evidently grateful for such a profession. See him, miss, first, then believe it. I felt forthwith a new impatience to see him. It was the beginning of a curiosity that for all the next hours I was to deepen, almost to pain. Mrs. Gross was aware, as I could judge, of what she had produced in me, and she followed it up with the assurance, "You might as well believe it of the little lady, bless her," she added the next moment. "Look at her." I turned and saw that Flora, whom 10 minutes before I had established in the schoolroom with a sheet of white paper, a pencil, and a copy of nice round O's, now presented herself to view at the open door. She expressed in her little way an extraordinary detachment from disagreeable duties, looking to me, however, with a great childish light that seemed to offer it as a mere result of the affection she had conceived for my person, which had rendered necessary that she should follow me. I needed nothing more than this to feel the full force of Mrs. Gross' comparison, and catching my pupil in my arms, covered her with kisses in which there was a sob of atonement. Nevertheless, the rest of the day I watched for further occasion to approach my colleague, especially as toward evening I began to fancy she rather sought to avoid me. I overtook her, I remember, on the staircase. We went down together, and at the bottom I detained her, holding her there with a hand on her arm. "I take what you said to me at noon as declaration that you've never known him to be bad." She threw back her head. She had clearly by this time and very honestly adopted an attitude. "Oh, never known him. I don't pretend that." I was upset again. "Then you have known him?" "Yes, indeed, miss, thank God." On reflection, I accepted this. "You mean that a boy who never is no boy for me." I held her tighter. "You like them with the spirit to be naughty?" Then, keeping pace with her answer, "So do I eagerly brought out. "But not to the degree to contaminate." "To contaminate?" My big word left her at a loss. I explained it. "To corrupt." She stared, taking my meaning in. but it produced in her an odd laugh. "Are you afraid he'll corrupt you?" She put the question with such a fine, bold humour that with a laugh, a little silly doubtless to match her own, I gave way for the time to the apprehension of ridicule. But the next day, as the hour for my drive approached, I cropped up in another place. "What was the lady who was here before?" "The last governess. She was also young and pretty, almost as young and almost as pretty, miss, even as you. And then I hope her youth and her beauty helped her." I recollect throwing it off. "He seems to like us young and pretty." "Oh, he did," Mrs. Gross assented. "It was the way he liked everyone." She had no sooner spoken, indeed, that she caught herself up. "I mean, that's his way, the master's." I was struck. "But of whom did you speak first?" She looked blank, but she coloured. "Why, of him. Of the master. Of who else?" There was so obviously no one else that the next moment I had lost my impression of her having accidentally said more than she meant, and I merely asked what I wanted to know. Did she see anything in the boy that wasn't right? She never told me. I had a scruple, but I overcame it. Was she careful, particular? Mrs. Gross appeared to try to be conscientious. "About some things, yes, but not about all." Again she considered. "Well, miss, she's gone. I won't tell tales." "I quite understand your feeling," I hastened to reply, but I thought it, after an instant, not opposed to this concession, to pursue. "Did she die here?" "No. She went off." I don't know what there was in this brevity of Mrs. Gross's that struck me as ambiguous. "Went off to die?" Mrs. Gross looked straight out of the window, but I felt that hypothetically I had the right to know what young persons engaged for Bligh were expected to do. "She was taken ill, you mean, and went home?" "She wasn't taken ill, as far as appeared, in this house. She left it at the end of the year to go home, as she said, for a short holiday, to which the time she had put in had certainly given her a right. We had then a young woman, a nursemaid, who stayed on, and who was a good girl and clever, and she took the children altogether for the interval. But our young lady never came back. And at the very moment I was expecting her, I heard from the master that she was dead." I turned this over. "But of what?" "He never told me. But please, miss," said Mrs. Gross, "I must get to my work." Chapter 3. Her thus turning her back on me was fortunately not, for my just preoccupations, a snub that could check the growth of our mutual esteem. We met, after I had brought home little Miles, more intimately than ever, on the ground of my stupefaction, my general emotion. So monstrous was I then ready to pronounce it, that such a child, as had now been revealed to me, should be under an interdict. I was a little late on the scene, and I felt, as he stood wistfully looking out for me before the door of the inn at which the coach had put him down, that I had seen him, on the instant, without and within, in the great glow of freshness, the same positive fragrance of purity in which I had, from the first moment, seen his little sister. He was incredibly beautiful, and Mrs. Gross had put her finger on it. Everything but a sort of passion of tenderness for him was swept away by his presence. When I then and there took him to my heart, for it was something divine that I have never found to the same degree in any child, his indescribable little air of knowing nothing in the world but love, it would have been impossible to carry a bad name with a greater sweetness of innocence, and by the time I had got back to Bligh with him, I remained merely bewildered, so far, that is, as I was not outraged by the sense of the horrible letter locked up in my room in a drawer. As soon as I could compass a private word with Mrs. Gross, I declared to her that it was grotesque. She promptly understood me. "You mean the cruel charge. It doesn't live an instant, my dear woman. Look at him." She smiled at my pretension to have discovered his charm. "I assure you, miss, I do nothing else." "What will you say, then?" she immediately added. "In answer to the letter?" I had made up my mind. "Nothing." "And to his uncle?" I was incisive. "Nothing." "And to the boy himself?" I was wonderful. "Nothing." She gave with her apron a great wipe to her mouth. "Then I'll stand by you. We'll see it out." "We'll see it out," I ardently echoed, giving her my hand to make it a vow. She held me there a moment, then whisked up her apron again with her detached hand. "Would you mind, miss, if I used the freedom to kiss me?" "No." I took the good creature in my arms, and after we had embraced like sisters, felt still more fortified and indignant. This, at all events, was for the time, a time so full that, as I recall the way it went, reminds me of all the art I need now to make it a little distinct. What I look back at with amazement is the situation I accepted. I had undertaken with my companion to see it out, and I was under a charm, apparently, that could smooth away the extent and the far and difficult connections of such an effort. I was lifted aloft on a great wave of infatuation and pity. I found it simple, in my ignorance, my confusion, and perhaps my conceit, to assume that I could deal with a boy whose education for the world was all on the point of beginning. I am unable even to remember at this day what proposal I framed for the end of his holidays and the resumption of his studies. Lessons with me, indeed, that charming summer. We all had a theory that he was to have, but I now feel that for weeks the lessons must have been rather my own. I learned something, at first, certainly, that had not been one of the teachings of my small, smothered life, learned to be amused and even amusing, and not to think for the morrow. It was the first time in a manner that I had known space and air and freedom, all the music of summer and all the mystery of nature. And then there was a consideration, and consideration was sweet. Oh, it was a trap, not designed, but deep, to my imagination, to my delicacy, perhaps to my vanity, to whatever in me was most excitable. The best way to picture it all is to say that I was off my guard. They gave me so little trouble, they were of a gentleness so extraordinary. I used to speculate, but even this with a dim disconnectedness, as to how the rough future, for all futures are rough, would handle them and might bruise them. They had the bloom of health and happiness, and yet, as if I had been in charge of a pair of little grandees, of princes of the blood, for whom everything to be right would have to be enclosed and protected, the only form that in my fancy the after years could take for them was that of a romantic, a really royal extension of the garden and the park. It may be, of course, above all, that what suddenly broke into this gives the previous time a charm of stillness, that hush in which something gathers or crouches. The change was actually like the spring of a beast. In the first weeks, the days were long. They often, at their finest, gave me what I used to call my own hour, the hour when, for my pupils, tea time and bedtime having come and gone, I had, before my final retirement, a small interval alone. Much as I liked my companions, this hour was the thing in the day I liked most, and I liked it best of all when, as the light faded, or rather, I should say, the day lingered, and the last calls of the last birds sounded, in a flushed sky from the old trees, I could take a turn into the grounds and enjoy, almost with a sense of property that amused and flattered me, the beauty and dignity of the place. It was a pleasure at these moments to feel myself tranquil and justified, doubtless perhaps also to reflect that by my discretion, my quiet good sense and general high propriety, I was giving pleasure, if he ever thought of it, to the person to whose pressure I had responded. What I was doing was what he had earnestly hoped and directly asked of me, and that I could, after all, do it proved even a greater joy than I had expected. I dare say I fancied myself, in short, a remarkable young woman, and took comfort in the faith that this would more publicly appear. Well, I needed to be remarkable to offer a front to the remarkable things that presently gave their first sign. It was plump one afternoon in the middle of my very hour. The children were tucked away, and I had come out for my stroll. One of the thoughts that, as I don't in the least shrink now from noting, used to be with me in these wanderings, that it would be as charming as a charming story to suddenly meet someone. Someone would appear there at the turn of the path, and would stand before me and smile and approve. I didn't ask more than that. I only asked that he should know, and the only way to be sure he knew would be to see it, and the kind light of it, in his handsome face. That was exactly present to me, by which I mean the face was, when, on the very first of the occasions, at the end of a long June day, I stopped short on emerging from one of the plantations and coming into view of the house. What arrested me on the spot, and with a shock much greater than any vision had allowed for, was the sense that my imagination had, in a flash, turned real. He did stand there, but high up, beyond the lawn, and at the very top of the tower to which on that first morning little Flora had conducted me. This tower was one of a pair, square, incongruous, crenellated structures that were distinguished for some reason, though I could see little difference, as the new and the old. They flanked opposite ends of the house, and were probably architectural absurdities, redeemed in a measure indeed by not being wholly disengaged, nor of a height too pretentious, dating, in their gingerbread antiquity, from a romantic revival that was already a respectable past. I admired them, had fancies about them, for we could all profit in a degree, especially when they loomed through the dusk, by the grandeur of their actual battlements. Yet it was not at such an elevation that the figure I had so often invoked seemed most in place. It produced in me, this figure, in the clear twilight, I remember, two distinct gasps of emotion, which were sharply the shock of my first and that of my second surprise. My second was a violent perception of the mistake of my first. The man who met my eyes was not the person I had precipitately supposed. There came to me thus a bewilderment of vision of which, after these years, there is no living view that I can hope to give. An unknown man in a lonely place is a permitted object of fear to a young woman privately bred, and the figure that faced me was, a few more seconds assured me, as little anyone else I knew as it was the image that had been in my mind. I had not seen it in Harley Street. I had not seen it anywhere. The place, moreover, in the strangest way in the world, had, on the instant, and by the very fact of its appearance, become a solitude, to me at least, making my statement here with a deliberation with which I have never made it. The whole feeling of the moment returns. It was as if, while I took in what I did take in, all the rest of the scene had been stricken with death. I can hear again, as I write, the intense hush in which the sounds of evening dropped. The rooks stopped cawing in the golden sky, and the friendly hour lost, for the minute, all its voice. But there was no other change in nature, unless indeed it were a change that I saw with a stranger sharpness. The gold was still in the sky, the clearness in the air, and the man who looked at me over the battlements was as definite as a picture in a frame. That's how I thought, with extraordinary quickness, of each person that he might have been, and that he was not. We were confronted across our distance quite long enough for me to ask myself with intensity who then he was, and to feel, as an effect of my inability to say, a wonder that in a few instants more became intense. The great question, or one of these, is afterward, I know, with regard to certain matters, the question of how long they have lasted. Well, this is a matter of mine, think what you will of it. Lasted while I caught at a dozen possibilities, none of which made a difference for the better, that I could see, in their having been in the house, and for how long, above all, a person of whom I was in ignorance. It lasted while I just bridled a little, with the sense that my office demanded that there should be no such ignorance and no such person. It lasted while this visitant, at all events, and there was a touch of the strange freedom, as I remember, in the sign of familiarity of his wearing no hat, seemed to fix me, from his position, with just the question, just the scrutiny, through the fading light, that his own presence provoked. We were too far apart to call to each other, but there was a moment at which, at shorter range, some challenge between us breaking the hush would have been the right result of our straight mutual stare. He was in one of the angles, the one away from the house, very erect as it struck me, and with both hands on the ledge. So I saw him as I see the letters I form on this page then, exactly, after a minute, as if to add to the spectacle, he slowly changed his place, passed, looking at me hard all the while, to the opposite corner of the platform. Yes, I had the sharpest sense that during this transit he never took his eyes from me, and I can see at this moment the way his hand, as he went, passed from one of the crenellations to the next. He stopped at the other corner, but less long, and even as he turned away, still markedly fixed me. He turned away. That was all I knew. Chapter 4. It was not that I didn't wait, on this occasion, for more, for I was rooted as deeply as I was shaken. Was there a secret at Bly, a mystery of Adolfo, or an insane and unmentionable relative kept in unsuspected confinement? I can't say how long I turned it over, or how long, in the confusion of curiosity and dread, I remained where I had had my collision. I only recall that when I re-entered the house, darkness had quite closed in. Agitation, in the interval, certainly had held me and driven me, for I must, in circling about the place, have walked 3 miles. But I was to be, later on, so much more overwhelmed that this mere dawn of alarm was a comparatively human chill. The most singular part of it, in fact, singular as the rest had been, was the part I became, in the hall, aware of in meeting Mrs. Gross. This picture comes back to me in the general train. The impression, as I received it on my return, of the wide, white-panelled space, bright in the lamplight, and with its portrait and red carpet, and of the good surprised look of my friend, which immediately told me she had missed me. It came to me straight away under her contact that, with plain heartiness, mere relieved anxiety at my appearance, she knew nothing whatever that could bear upon the incident I had there ready for her. I had not suspected in advance that her comfortable face would pull me up, and I somehow measured the importance of what I had seen by my thus finding myself hesitate to mention it. Scarce anything in the whole history seems to me so odd as this fact that my real beginning of fear was one, as I may say, with the instinct of sparing my companion. On the spot, accordingly, in the pleasant hall, and with her eyes on me, I, for a reason that I couldn't then have phrased, achieved an inward resolution, offered a vague pretext for my lateness, and with the plea of the beauty of the night and of the heavy dew and wet feet, went as soon as possible to my room. Here it was another affair. For many days after, it was a queer affair enough. There were hours, from day to day, or at least there were moments, snatched even from clear duties, when I had to shut myself up to think. It was not so much yet that I was more nervous than I could bear to be, as that I was remarkably afraid of becoming so, for the truth I had now to turn over was, simply and clearly, the truth that I could arrive at no account whatever of the visitor with whom I had been so inexplicably, and yet, as it seemed to me, so intimately concerned. It took little time to see that I could sound without forms of inquiry, and without exciting remark, any domestic complications. The shock I had suffered must have sharpened all my senses. I felt sure at the end of 3 days, and as the result of mere closer attention, that I had not been practised upon by the servants, nor made the object of any game. Of whatever it was that I knew, nothing was known around me. There was but one sane inference. Someone had taken a liberty rather gross. That was what repeatedly I dipped into my room and locked the door to say to myself. We had been collectively subject to an intrusion. Some unscrupulous traveller, curious in old houses, had made his way in unobserved, enjoyed the prospect from the best point of view, and then stolen out as he came. If he had given me such a bold, hard stare, that was but a part of his indiscretion. The good thing, after all, was that we should surely see no more of him. This was not so good a thing, I admit, as not to leave me to judge that what essentially made nothing else much signify was simply my charming work. My charming work was just my life with Miles and Flora, and through nothing could I so like it as through feeling that I could throw myself into it in trouble. The attraction of my small charges was a constant joy, leading me to wonder afresh at the vanity of my original fears. The distaste I had begun by entertaining for the probable grey prose of my office. There was to be no grey prose, it appeared, and no long grind. So how could work not be charming that presented itself as daily beauty? It was all the romance of the nursery and the poetry of the schoolroom. I don't mean by this, of course, that we studied only fiction and verse. I mean I can express no otherwise the sort of interest my companions inspired. How can I describe that except by saying that instead of growing used to them, and it's a marvel for a governess, I call the sisterhood to witness, I made constant fresh discoveries. There was one direction assuredly in which these discoveries stopped. Deep obscurity continued to cover the region of the boy's conduct at school. It had been promptly given me, I have noted, to face the mystery without a pang. Perhaps even it would be nearer the truth to say that, without a word, he himself had cleared it up. He had made the whole charge absurd. My conclusion bloomed there with the real rose flush of his innocence. He was only too fine and fair for the little horrid unclean school world, and he had paid a price for it. I reflected acutely that the sense of such differences, such superiorities of quality always on the part of the majority, which could include even stupid, sordid headmasters, turn infallibly to the vindictive. Both the children had a gentleness, it was their only fault, and it never made Miles a muff, that kept them, how should I express it, almost impersonal, and certainly quite unpunishable. They were like the cherubs of the anecdote, who had, morally at any rate, nothing to whack. I remember feeling with Miles in especial as if we had had, as it were, no history. We expect of a small child a scant one, but there was in this beautiful little boy something extraordinarily sensitive, yet extraordinarily happy, that more than any creature of his age I have seen struck me as beginning anew each day. He had never for a second suffered. I took this as a direct disproof of his having really been chastised. If he had been wicked, he would have caught it, and I should have caught it by the rebound. I should have found a trace. I found nothing at all, and he was therefore an angel. He never spoke of his school, never mentioned a comrade or a master, and I, for my part, was quite too much disgusted to allude to them. Of course, I was under the spell, and the wonderful part is that even at the time I perfectly knew I was, but I gave myself up to it. It was an antidote to any pain, and I had more pains than one. I was in receipt, in those days, of disturbing letters from home, where things were not going well. But with my children, what things in the world mattered? That was the question I used to put to my scrappy retirements. I was dazzled by their loveliness. There was a Sunday, to get on, when it rained with such force and for so many hours that there could be no procession to church, in consequence of which, as the day declined, I had arranged with Mrs. Gross that should the evening show improvement, we would attend together the late service. The rain happily stopped, and I prepared for our walk, which, through the park and by the good road to the village, would be a matter of 20 minutes. Coming downstairs to meet my colleague in the hall, I remembered a pair of gloves that had required 3 stitches and that had received them, with the publicity perhaps not edifying, while I sat with the children at their tea, served on Sundays by exception, in that cold, clean temple of mahogany and brass, the grown-up dining room. The gloves had been dropped there, and I turned in to recover them. The day was grey enough, but the afternoon light still lingered, and it enabled me, on crossing the threshold, not only to recognize on the chair near the wide window, then closed, the articles I wanted, but to become aware of a person on the other side of the window, and looking straight in. One step into the room had sufficed. My vision was instantaneous. It was all there. The person looking straight in was the person who had already appeared to me. He appeared thus again with, I won't say greater distinctness, for that was impossible, but with a nearness that represented a forward stride in our intercourse, and made me, as I met him, catch my breath and turn cold. He was the same, and seen this time, as he had been seen before, from the waist up, the window, though the dining room was on the ground floor, not going down to the terrace on which he stood. His face was close to the glass, yet the effect of this better view was strangely only to show me how intense the former had been. He remained but a few seconds, long enough to convince me he also saw and recognized, but it was as if I had been looking at him for years, and had known him always. Something, however, happened this time that had not happened before. His stare into my face, through the glass and across the room, was as deep and hard as then. But it quitted me for a moment, during which I could still watch it, see it fix successively several other things. On the spot there came to me the added shock of a certitude that it was not for me he had come there. He had come for someone else. The flash of this knowledge, for it was knowledge in the midst of dread, produced in me the most extraordinary effect. Started as I stood there, a sudden vibration of duty and courage. I say courage because I was beyond all doubt already far gone. I bounded straight out of the door again, reached that of the house, got in an instant upon the drive, and passing along the terrace as fast as I could rush, turned the corner and came full in sight. But it was in sight of nothing now. My visitor had vanished. I stopped. I almost dropped with the real relief of this, but I took in the whole scene. I gave him time to reappear. I call it time, but how long was it? I can't speak to the purpose today of the duration of these things. That kind of measure must have left me. They couldn't have lasted as they actually appeared to me to last. The terrace and the whole place, the lawn and the garden beyond it, all I could see of the park were empty, with a great emptiness. There were shrubberies and big trees, but I remember the clear assurance I felt that none of them concealed him. He was there, or was not there if I didn't see him. I got hold of this, then instinctively, instead of returning as I had come, went to the window. It was confusedly present to me that I ought to place myself where he had stood. I did so. I applied my face to the pane and looked, as he had looked, into the room. As if at this moment, to show me exactly what his range had been, Mrs. Gross, as I had done for himself just before, came in from the hall. With this, I had the full image of a repetition of what had already occurred. She saw me as I had seen my own visitant. She pulled up short, as I had done. I gave her something of the shock that I received. She turned white, and this made me ask myself if I had blanched as much. She stared in short and retreated on just my lines, and I knew she had then passed out and come round to me, and that I should presently meet her. I remained where I was, and while I waited, I thought of more things than one. But there's only one I take space to mention. I wondered why she should be scared. Chapter 5. Oh, she let me know as soon as round the corner of the house she loomed again into view. What in the name of goodness is the matter? She was now flushed and out of breath. I said nothing till she came quite near. With me? I must have made a wonderful face. Do I show it? You're white as a sheet. You look awful. I considered I could meet on this without scruple any innocence. My need to respect the bloom of Mrs. Gross's had dropped without a rustle from my shoulders, and if I wavered for the instant, it was not with what I kept back. I put out my hand to her, and she took it. I held her hard a little, liking to feel her close to me. There was a kind of support in the shy heave of her surprise. You came for me for church, of course, but I can't go. Has anything happened? Yes, you must know now. Did I look very queer? Through this window? Dreadful. Well, I said, I've been frightened. Mrs. Gross's eyes expressed plainly that she had no wish to be, yet also that she knew too well her place not to be ready to share with me any marked inconvenience. Oh, it was quite settled that she must share. Just what you saw from the dining room a minute ago was the effect of that. What I saw before was much worse. Her hand tightened. What was it? An extraordinary man, looking in. What extraordinary man? I haven't the least idea. Mrs. Gross gazed round us in vain. Then where is he gone? I know still less. Have you seen him before? Yes, once, on the old tower. She could only look at me harder. Do you mean he's a stranger? Oh, very much. Yet you didn't tell me. No, for reasons, but now that you've guessed. Mrs. Gross's round eyes encountered this charge. I haven't guessed, she said very simply. How can I if you don't imagine? I don't in the very least. You've seen him nowhere but on the tower, and on this spot just now. Mrs. Gross looked round again. What was he doing on the tower? Only standing there and looking down at me. She thought a minute. Was he a gentleman? I found I had no need to think. No. She gazed in deeper wonder. No? Then nobody about the place, nobody from the village? Nobody. I didn't tell you, but I made sure. She breathed a vague relief. This was, oddly, so much to the good. It only went indeed a little way. But if he isn't a gentleman, what is he? He's a horror. A horror? He's, God help me if I know what he is. Mrs. Grose looked round once more. She fixed her eyes on the duskier distance, then pulling herself together, turned to me with abrupt inconsequence. It's time we should be at church. Oh, I'm not fit for church. Won't it do you good? It won't do them, I nodded at the house. The children, I can't leave them now. You're afraid. I spoke boldly. I'm afraid of him. Mrs. Grose's large face showed me at this, for the first time, a faraway faint glimmer of a consciousness more acute. I somehow made out in it the delayed dawn of an idea I myself had not given her, and that was as yet quite obscure to me. It comes back to me that I thought instantly of this as something I could get from her, and I felt it to be connected with the desire she presently showed to know more. When was it? On the tower? About the middle of the month, at this same hour. Almost at dark, said Mrs. Grose. Oh, no, not nearly. I saw him as I see you. Then how did he get in? And how did he get out? I laughed. I had no opportunity to ask him. This evening, you see, I pursued, he has not been able to get in. He only peeps. I hope it'll be confined to that. She had now let go of my hand. She turned away a little. I waited an instant, then I brought out, Go to church. Goodbye. I must watch. Slowly she faced me again. Do you fear for them? We met in another long look. Don't you? Instead of answering, she came nearer to the window and for a minute applied her face to the glass. You see how he could see, I meanwhile went on. She didn't move. How long was he here? Till I came out. I came to meet him. Mrs. Grose at last turned round, and there was still more in her face. I couldn't have come out. Neither could I laughed again, but I did come. I have my duty. So have I mine, she replied, after which she added, What's he like? I've been dying to tell you, but he's like nobody. Nobody, she echoed. He has no hat. Then seeing in her face that she already in this, with a deeper dismay, found a touch of picture, I quickly added stroke to stroke. He has red hair, very close curling, and a pale face, long in shape, with straight, good features and a little, rather queer whiskers that are as red as his hair. His eyebrows are somehow darker. They look particularly arched, and as if they might move a good deal. His eyes are sharp, strange, awfully, but I only know clearly that they're rather small and very fixed. His mouth's wide, and his lips are thin, and except for his little whiskers, he's quite clean-shaven. He gives me a sort of sense of looking like an actor. An actor? It was impossible to resemble one less, at least, than Mrs. Grose at that moment. I've never seen one, but I suppose them. He's tall, active, erect, I continued, but never, no, never a gentleman. My companion's face had blanched as I went on. Her round eyes started, and her mild mouth gaped. A gentleman, she gasped, confounded, stupefied. A gentleman, he? You know him, then? She visibly tried to hold herself. But he's handsome. I saw the way to help her. Remarkably. And dressed? In somebody's clothes. They're smart, but they're not his own. She broke into a breathless affirmative groan. They're the master's. I caught it up. Do you know him? She faltered but a second. Quint, she cried. Quint? Peter Quint, his own man, his valet, when he was here. When the master was? Gaping still but meeting me, she pieced it all together. He never wore his hair, but he did wear, well, there were waistcoats missed. They were both here last year, then the master went, and Quint was alone. I faltered, but halting a little. Alone? Alone with us, then, as from a deeper depth. In charge, she added. And what became of him? She hung fire so long that I was still more mystified. He went too, she brought out at last. Went where? Her expression at this became extraordinary. God knows where. He died. Died? I almost shrieked. She seemed fairly to square herself, plant herself more firmly to utter the wonder of it. Yes, Mr. Quint is dead. Chapter 6. It took, of course, more than that particular passage to place us together in presence of what we now had to live with as we could. My dreadful liability to impressions of the order so vividly exemplified. my companion's knowledge, henceforth, a knowledge half consternation and half compassion of that liability. There had been this evening, after the revelation left me for an hour so prostrate, there had been for either of us no attendance on any service, but a little service of tears and vows, of prayers and promises, a climax to the series of mutual challenges and pledges that had straightway ensued on our retreating together to the schoolroom and shutting ourselves up there to have everything out. The result of our having everything out was simply to reduce our situation to the last rigour of its elements. She herself had seen nothing, not the shadow of a shadow, and nobody in the house but the governess was in the governess's plight. Yet she accepted, without directly impugning my sanity, the truth as I gave it to her, and ended by showing me on this ground an awe-stricken tenderness, an expression of the sense of my more than questionable privilege, of which the very breath has remained with me as that of the sweetest of human charities. What was settled between us accordingly that night was that we thought we might bear things together, and I wasn't even sure that in spite of her exemption it was she who had the best of the burden. I knew at this hour, I think, as well as I knew later, what I was capable of meeting to shelter my pupils, but it took me some time to be wholly sure of what my honest ally was prepared for to keep terms with so compromising a contract. It was queer company enough, quite as queer as the company I received, but as I trace over what we went through, I see how much common ground we might have found in the one idea that by good fortune could steady us. It was the idea, the second movement, that led me straight out, as I may say, of the inner chamber of my dread. I could take the air in the court, at least, and there Mrs. Gross could join me. Perfectly can I recall now the particular way strength came to me before we separated for the night. We had gone over and over every feature of what I had seen. He was looking for someone else, you say, someone who was not you. He was looking for little Miles. A portentous clearness now possessed me. That's whom he was looking for. But how do you know? I know. My exultation grew, and you know, my dear. She didn't deny this, but I felt not even so much telling as that. She resumed, in a moment at any rate, what if he should see him? Little Miles, that's what he wants. She looked immensely scared again. The child? Heaven forbid, the man. He wants to appear to them. That he might was an awful conception, and yet, somehow, I could keep it at bay, which, moreover, as we lingered there, was what I succeeded in practically proving. I had an absolute certainty that I should see again what I had already seen. But something within me said that by offering myself bravely as the sole subject of such experience, by accepting, by inviting, by surmounting it all, I should serve as an expiatory victim and guard the tranquillity of my companions. The children in especial I should thus fence about and absolutely save. I recall one of the last things I said that night to Mrs. Gross. It does strike me that my pupils have never mentioned. She looked at me hard as I musingly pulled up. His having been here and the time they were with him. The time they were with him and his name, his presence, his history, in any way. Oh, the little lady doesn't remember. She never heard or knew. The circumstances of his death, I thought with some intensity. Perhaps not, but Miles would remember. Miles would know. Ah, don't try him, broke from Mrs. Gross. I returned the look she had given me. Don't be afraid, I continued to think. It is rather odd that he's never spoken of him. Never by the least allusion, and you tell me they were great friends. Oh, it wasn't him, Mrs. Gross, with emphasis declared. It was Quint's own fancy. To play with him, I mean to spoil him. She paused a moment, then she added, Quint was much too free. This gave me, straight from my vision of his face, such a face, a sudden sickness of disgust. Too free with my boy. Too free with everyone. I forbore for the moment to analyze this description further than by the reflection that a part of it applied to several of the members of the household, of the half-dozen maids and men who were still of our small colony. But there was everything, for our apprehension in the lucky fact that no discomfortable legend, no perturbation of scullions had ever within anyone's memory attached to the kind old place. It had neither bad name nor ill fame, and Mrs. Grose most apparently only desired to cling to me and to quake in silence. I even put her, the very last thing of all, to the test. It was when, at midnight, she had her hand on the schoolroom door to take leave. I have it from you, then, for it's of great importance, that he was definitely and admittedly bad. Oh, not admittedly. I knew it, but the master didn't. And you never told him. Well, he didn't like tale-bearing. He hated complaints. He was terribly short with anything of that kind. And if people were all right to him, he wouldn't be bothered with more. This squared well enough with my impressions of him. He was not a trouble-loving gentleman, nor so very particular perhaps about some of the company he kept. All the same, I pressed my interlocutress. I promise you I would have told. She felt my discrimination. I dare say I was wrong, but really, I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of things that man could do. Quint was so clever. He was so deep. I took this in still more than probably I showed. You weren't afraid of anything else, not of his effect. His effect, she repeated with a face of anguish and waiting while I faltered. On innocent little precious lives. They were in your charge. No, they were not in mine, she roundly and distressfully returned. The master believed in him and placed him here because he was supposed to not be well and the country air so good for him. So he had everything to say. Yes, she let me have it, even about them. Them, that creature. I had to smother a kind of howl, and how could you bear it? No, I couldn't, and I can't now. And the poor woman burst into tears. A rigid control from the next day was, as I have said, to follow them, yet how often and how passionately for a week we came back together to the subject, much as we had discussed it that Sunday night. I was in the immediate later hours in especial, for it may be imagined whether I slept, still haunted with the shadow of something she had not told me. I myself had kept back nothing, but there was a word Mrs. Grose had kept back. I was sure, moreover, by morning, that this was not from a failure of frankness, but because on every side there were fears. It seemed to me, in retrospect, that by the time the morrow's sun was high, I had restlessly read into the fact before us almost all the meaning they were to receive from subsequent and more cruel occurrences. What they gave me above all was just the sinister figure of the living man. The dead one would keep a while, and of the months he had continuously passed at Bly, which added up made a formidable stretch. The limit of this evil time had arrived only when, on the dawn of a winter's morning, Peter Quint was found by a labourer going to early work, stone dead, on the road from the village. A catastrophe explained, superficially at least, by a visible wound to his head. Such a wound as might have been produced, and as on the final evidence had been, by a fatal slip, in the dark, and after leaving the public house, on a steepish, icy slope, a wrong path altogether, at the bottom of which he lay. The icy slope, the turn mistaken at night and in liquor, accounted for much. Practically in the end, and after the inquest and barbless chatter, for everything. But there had been matters in his life, strange passages and perils, secret disorders, vices more than suspected, that would have accounted for a great deal more. I scarce know how to put my story into words that shall be a credible picture of my state of mind, but I was in these days literally able to find a joy in the extraordinary flight of heroism the occasion demanded of me. I now saw that I had been asked for a service admirable and difficult, and there would be a greatness in letting it be seen, in the right quarter, that I could succeed where many another girl might have failed. It was an immense help to me. I confess I rather applaud myself as I look back, that I saw my service so strongly and so simply. I was there to protect and defend the little creatures in the world, the most bereaved and the most lovable. The appeal of whose helplessness had suddenly become only too explicit, a deep, constant ache of one's own committed heart. We were cut off, really, together. We were united in our danger. They had nothing but me, and I had them. It was, in short, a magnificent chance. This chance presented itself to me in an image richly material. I was a screen. I was to stand before them. The more I saw, the less they would. I began to watch them in a stifled suspense, a disguised excitement that might well, had it continued too long, have turned to something like madness. What saved me, as I now see, was that it turned to something else altogether. It didn't last, the suspense. It was superseded by horrible proofs. Proofs, I say, yes, from the moment I really took hold. This moment dated from an afternoon hour that I happened to spend in the grounds with the younger of my pupils alone. We had left Miles indoors. On the red cushion of a deep window seat, he had wished to finish a book, and I had been glad to encourage a purpose so laudable in a young man whose only defect was an occasional excess of the restless. His sister, on the contrary, had been alert to come out, and I strolled with her half an hour, seeking the shade, for the sun was still high, and the day exceptionally warm. I was aware afresh with her as we went of how like her brother she contrived. It was the charming thing in both children to let me alone without appearing to drop me, and to accompany me without appearing to surround. They were never importunate, and yet never listless. My attention to them all really went to seeing them amuse themselves immensely without me. This was a spectacle they seemed actively to prepare, and that engaged me as an active admirer. I walked in a world of their invention. They had no occasion whatever to draw upon mine, so that my time was taken only with being, for them, some remarkable personal thing that the game of the moment required, and that was merely, thanks to my superior, my exalted stamp, a happy and highly distinguished sinecure. I forget what I was on that present occasion. I only remember that I was something very important and very quiet, and that Flora was playing very hard. We were on the edge of the lake, and as we had lately begun geography, the lake was the Sea of Azov. Suddenly, in these circumstances, I became aware that on the other side of the Sea of Azov, we had an interested spectator. The way this knowledge gathered in me was the strangest thing in the world, the strangest, that is, except the very much stranger in which it quickly merged itself. I had sat down with a piece of work, for I was something or other that could sit, on the old stone bench which overlooked the pond, and in this position I began to take in with certitude, and yet without direct vision, the presence at a distance of a third person. The old trees, the thick shrubbery made a great and pleasant shade, but it was all suffused with the brightness of the hot, still hour. There was no ambiguity in anything, none whatever at least in the conviction I, from one moment to another, found myself forming as to what I should see straight before me and across the lake as a consequence of raising my eyes. They were attached at this juncture to the stitching which I was engaged, and I could feel once more the spasm of my effort not to move them till I should so have steadied myself as to be able to make up my mind what to do. There was an alien object in view, a figure whose right of presence I instantly, passionately questioned. I recollect counting over perfectly the possibilities, reminding myself that nothing was more natural, for instance, than the appearance of one of the men about the place, or even of a messenger, a postman, or a tradesman's boy from the village. That reminder had as little effect on my practical certitude as I was conscious, still, even without looking, of its having upon the character and attitude of our visitor. Nothing was more natural than that these things should be the other things they absolutely were not. Of the positive identity of the apparition, I would assure myself as soon as the small clock of my courage should have ticked out the right second. Meanwhile, with an effort that was already sharp enough, I transferred my eyes straight to little Flora, who at the moment was about 10 yards away. My heart had stood still for an instant with the wonder and the terror of the question whether she too would see, and I held my breath while I waited for what a cry from her, what some sudden innocent sign either of interest or of alarm would tell me. I waited, but nothing came. Then, in the first place, and there is something more dire in this I feel than in anything I have to relate, I was determined by a sense that, within a minute, all sounds from her had previously dropped, and in the second, by the circumstance that also within the minute she had in her play turned her back to the water. This was her attitude when I at last looked at her, looked with the confirmed conviction that we were still together under direct personal notice. She had picked up a small flat piece of wood, which happened to have in it a little hole that had evidently suggested to her the idea of sticking in another fragment that might figure as a mast and make the thing a boat. This second morsel, as I watched her, she was very markedly and intently attempting to tighten in its place. My apprehension of what she was doing sustained me, so that after some seconds I felt I was ready for more. Then I again shifted my eyes. I faced what I had to face. Chapter 7. I got hold of Mrs. Gross as soon after this as I could, and I can give no intelligible account of how I fought out the interval. Yet I still hear myself cry as I fairly threw myself into her arms. They know, it's too monstrous, they know. And what on earth? I felt her incredulity as she held me. Why, all that we know, and heaven knows what else besides. Then, as she released me, I made it out to her, made it out perhaps only now with full coherency even to myself. 2 hours ago in the garden, I could scarce articulate. Flora saw. Mrs. Gross took it as she might have taken a blow in the stomach. She's told you? She panted. Not a word, that's the horror. She kept it to herself. The child of 8, that child. Unutterable still for me was the stupefaction of it. Mrs. Gross, of course, could only gape the wider. Then how do you know? I was there. I saw with my eyes, saw that she was perfectly aware. Do you mean aware of him? No, of her. I was conscious as I spoke that I looked prodigious things, for I got the slow reflection of them in my companion's face. Another person this time, but a figure of quite as unmissable horror and evil, a woman in black, pale and dreadful, with such an air also and such a face. On the other side of the lake, I was there with the child, quiet for the hour, and in the midst of it she came. Came how? From where? From where they come from. She just appeared and stood there, but not so near, and without coming nearer. Oh, for the effect and the feeling, she might have been as close as you. My friend, with an odd impulse, fell back a step. Was she someone you've never seen? Yes, but someone the child has. Someone you have. Then, to show how I had thought it all out, my predecessor, the one who died. Miss Jessel. Miss Jessel. You don't believe me? I pressed. She turned right and left in her distress. How can you be sure? This drew from me, in the state of my nerves, a flash of impatience. Then ask Flora, she's sure. But I had no sooner spoken than I caught myself up. No, for God's sake, don't. She'll say she isn't. She'll lie. Mrs. Gross was not too bewildered instinctively to protest. How can you? Because I'm clear, Flora doesn't want me to know. It's only then to spare you. No, there are depths. The more I go over it, the more I see in it, and the more I see in it, the more I fear. I don't know what I don't see, what I don't fear. Mrs. Gross tried to keep up with me. You mean you're afraid of seeing her again? Oh, no, that's nothing now. Then I explained. It's of not seeing her. But my companion only looked wan. I don't understand you. Well, it's that the child may keep it up, and that the child assuredly will, without my knowing it. At the image of this possibility, Mrs. Gross for a moment collapsed, yet presently to pull herself together again, as if from the positive force of the sense of what, should we yield an inch, there would really be to give way to. Dear, we must keep our heads. And after all, if she doesn't mind it, she even tried a grim joke. Perhaps she likes it. Likes such things, the scrap of an infant. Isn't it just a proof of her blessed innocence? My friend bravely inquired. She brought me for the instant almost round. Oh, we must clutch at that, we must cling to it. If it isn't the proof of what you say, it's a proof of God knows what. For the woman's a horror of horrors. Mrs. Gross at this fixed her eyes a minute on the ground, then at last raising them, Tell me how you know, she said. Then you admit it's what she was, I cried. Tell me how you know, my friend simply repeated. No, by seeing her. by the way she looked. At you, do you mean, so wickedly? Dear me, no, I could have borne that. She gave me never a glance. She only fixed the child. Mrs. Gross tried to see it. Fixed her? Oh, with such awful eyes. She stared at mine as if they might really have resembled them. Do you mean of dislike? God help us, no, of something much worse. Worse than dislike. This left her indeed at a loss, with a determination indescribable, with a kind of fury of intention, and made her turn pale. Intention? To get hold of her. Mrs. Gross, her eyes just lingering on mine, gave a shudder and walked to the window, and while she stood there looking out, I completed my statement. That's what Flora knows. After a little, she turned round. The person was in black, you say? In mourning, rather poor, almost shabby, but yes, with extraordinary beauty. I now recognized what I had at last, stroke by stroke, brought the victim of my confidence, for she quite visibly weighed this. Oh, handsome, very, very, I insisted. Wonderfully handsome, but infamous. She slowly came back to me. Miss Jessel was infamous. She once more took my hand in both her own, holding it as tight as if to fortify me against the increase of alarm I might draw from this disclosure. They were both infamous, she finally said. So, for a little while, we faced it once more together, and I found absolutely a degree of help in seeing it now so straight. I appreciate, I said, the great decency of your not having hitherto spoken, but the time has certainly come to give me the whole thing. She appeared to assent to this, but still only in silence, seeing which I went on. I must have it now. Of what did she die? Come, there was something between them. There was everything. In spite of the difference, of their rank, their condition, she brought it woefully out. She was a lady. I turned it over. I again saw, yes, she was a lady, and he so dreadfully below, said Mrs. Gross. I felt that I doubtless needn't press too hard in such company on the place of a servant in the scale, but there was nothing to prevent an acceptance of my companion's own measure of my predecessor's abasement. There was a way to deal with that, and I dealt the more readily for my full vision on the evidence of our employer's late clever, good-looking own man, impudent, assured, spoiled, depraved. The fellow was a hound. Mrs. Gross considered as if it were perhaps a little a case for the sense of shades. I've never seen one like him. He did what he wished. With her, with them all. It was as if now in my friend's own eyes Miss Jessel had again appeared. It seemed, at any rate for an instant, to see their evocation of her as distinctly as I had seen her by the pond. And I brought out with decision, it must have been also what she wished. Mrs. Gross' face signified that it had been indeed, but she said at the same time, poor woman, she paid for it. Then you do know what she died of? I asked. No, I know nothing. I wanted not to know. I was glad enough I didn't, and I thanked heaven she was well out of this. Yet you had, then, your idea of her real reason for leaving? Oh, yes, as to that. She couldn't have stayed. Fancy it here for a governess. And afterward I imagined, and I still imagine, and what I imagine is dreadful. Not so dreadful as what I do, I replied, on which I must have shown her, as I was indeed but too conscious, a front of miserable defeat. It brought out again all her compassion for me, and at the renewed touch of her kindness, my power to resist broke down. I burst, as I had the other time made her burst, into tears. She took me to her motherly breast, and my lamentation overflowed. I don't do it, I sobbed in despair. I don't save or shield them. It's far worse than I dreamed. They're lost. Chapter 8. What I had said to Mrs. Gross was true enough. There were in the matter I had put before her depths and possibilities that I lacked resolution to sound, so that when we met once more in the wonder of it, we were of a common mind about the duty of resistance to extravagant fancies. We were to keep our heads, if we should keep nothing else, difficult indeed as that might be in the face of what, in our prodigious experience, was least to be questioned. Late that night, while the house slept, we had another talk in my room, when she went all the way with me as to its being beyond doubt that I had seen, Exactly what I had seen. To hold her perfectly in the pinch of that, I found I had only to ask her how, if I had made it up. I came to be able to give of each of the persons appearing to me a picture disclosing to the last detail their special marks, a portrait on the exhibition of which she had instantly recognized and named them. She wished, of course, small blame to her, to sink the whole subject, and I was quick to assure her that my own interest in it had now violently taken the form of a search for the way to escape from it. I encountered her on the ground of a probability that with the recurrence we took for granted, I should get used to my danger, distinctly professing that my personal exposure had suddenly become the least of my discomforts. It was my new suspicion that was intolerable, and yet even to this complication the later hours of the day had brought a little ease. On leaving her after my first outbreak, I had of course returned to my pupils, associating the right remedy for my dismay with that sense of their charm, which I had already found to be a thing I could positively cultivate, and which had never failed me yet. I had simply, in other words, plunged afresh into Flora's special society, and there become aware, it was almost a luxury, that she could put her little conscious hand straight upon the spot that ached. She had looked at me in sweet speculation, and then had accused me to my face of having cried. I had supposed I had brushed away the ugly sins, but I could literally, for the time at all events, rejoice, under this fathomless charity, that they had not entirely disappeared. To gaze into the depths of blue of the child's eyes and pronounce their loveliness a trick of premature cunning was to be guilty of a cynicism in preference to which I naturally preferred to abjure my judgment, and so far as might be, my agitation. I couldn't abjure for merely wanting to, but I could repeat to Mrs. Gross, as I did there over and over in the small hours, that with their voices in the air, their pressure on one's heart, and their fragrant faces against one's cheek, everything fell to the ground but their incapacity and their beauty. It was a pity that somehow, to settle this once for all, I had equally to re-enumerate the signs of subtlety that in the afternoon, by the lake, had made a miracle of my show of self-possession. It was a pity to be obliged to re-investigate the certitude of the moment itself, and repeat how it had come to me as a revelation that the inconceivable communion I then surprised was a matter for either party of habit. It was a pity that I should have had to quaver out again the reasons for my not having in my delusion so much as questioned that the little girl saw our visitant even as I actually saw Mrs. Gross herself, and that she wanted, by just so much as she did thus see, to make me suppose she didn't, and at the same time, without showing anything, arrive at a guess as to whether I myself did. It was a pity that I needed once more to describe the portentous little activity by which she sought to divert my attention, the perceptible increase of movement, the greater intensity of play, the singing, the gabbling of nonsense, and the invitation to romp. Yet, if I had not indulged, to prove there was nothing in it in this review, I should have missed the 2 or 3 dim elements of comfort that still remained to me. I should not, for instance, have been able to asseverate to my friend that I was certain, which was so much for the good, that I at least had not betrayed myself. I should not have been prompted by stress of need, by desperation of mind, I scarce know what to call it, to invoke such further aid to my intelligence as might spring from pushing my colleague fairly to the wall. She had told me, bit by bit, under pressure, a great deal, but a small, shifty spot on the wrong side of it all still sometimes brushed my brow like the wing of a bat, and I remember how on this occasion, for the sleeping house, and the concentration of alike of our danger and our watch seemed to help, I felt the importance of giving the last jerk to the curtain. "I don't believe anything so horrible," I recollect saying. "No, let us put it definitely, my dear, that I don't. But if I did, there's a thing I should require now, just without sparing you the least bit more, oh, not a scrap, come, to get out of you." "What was it you had in mind? When our distress before Miles came back, over the letter from his school, you said, under my insistence, that you didn't pretend for him that he had not ever, literally, ever been bad. He has not literally ever, in these weeks that I myself have lived with him and so closely watched him, he has been an imperturbable little prodigy of delightful, lovable goodness. Therefore, You might perfectly have made the claim for him if you had not, as it happened, seen an exception to take. What was your exception? And to what passage in your personal observation of him did you refer? It was a dreadfully austere inquiry, but levity was not our note, and at any rate before the grey dawn admonished us to separate, I had got my answer. What my friend had in mind proved to be immensely to the purpose. It was neither more nor less than the circumstance that for a period of several months Quint and the boy had been perpetually together. It was in fact the very appropriate truth that she had ventured to criticize the propriety, to hint at the incongruity of so close an alliance, and even go so far on the subject as a frank overture to Miss Jessel. Miss Jessel had, with a most strange manner, requested her to mind her business, and the good woman had, on this, directly approached little Miles. What she had said to him, since I pressed, was that she liked to see young gentlemen not forget their station. I pressed again, of course, at this. He reminded him that Quint was only a base menial, as you might say, and it was his answer, for one thing, that was bad, and for another thing I waited. He repeated your words to Quint. No, not that. It's just what he wouldn't. She could still impress upon me. I was sure, at any rate, she added, that he didn't, but he denied certain occasions. What occasions? When they had been out about together, quite as if Quint were his tutor, and a very grand one, and Miss Jessel only for the little lady. When he had gone off with the fellow, I mean, and spent hours with him. He then prevaricated about it. He said that he hadn't. Her assent was clear enough to cause me to add in a moment, I see. He lied. Oh, Mrs. Gross mumbled. This was a suggestion that it didn't matter, which indeed she backed up by a further remark. You see, after all, Miss Jessel didn't mind. She didn't forbid him. I considered. Did he put that to you as a justification? At this, she dropped again. No, he never spoke of it. Never mentioned her in connection with Quint. She saw, visibly flushing, where I was coming out. Well, he didn't show anything. He denied, she repeated. He denied. Lord, how I pressed her now. So that you could see he knew what was between the two wretches. I don't know, the poor woman groaned. You do know, you dear thing, I replied. Only you haven't my dreadful boldness of mind, and you keep back out of timidity and modesty and delicacy, even the impression that in the past, when you had, without my aid, to flounder about in silence, most of all made you miserable. But I shall get it out of you yet. There was something in the boy that suggested to you, I continued, that he covered and concealed their relation. Oh, he couldn't prevent your learning the truth, I dare say. But heavens, I fell with vehemence a-thinking. What it shows that they must to that extent have succeeded in making of him. Ah, nothing that's not nice now, Mrs. Gross lugubriously pleaded. I don't wonder you looked queer, I persisted, when I mentioned to you the letter from his school. I doubt if I looked as queer as you, she retorted with homely force. And if he was so bad then as that comes to, how is he such an angel now? Yes, indeed, and if he was a fiend at school, how? Well, I said in my torment, you must put it to me again, but I shall not be able to tell you for some days. Only put it to me again. I cried in a way that made my friend stare. There are directions in which I must not for the present let myself go. Meanwhile, I returned to her first example, the one to which she had just previously referred, of the boy's happy capacity for an occasional slip. If Quint, on your remonstrance at the time you speak of, was a base menial, one of the things Miles said to you, I find myself guessing, was that you were another. Again, her admission was so adequate that I continued. And you forgave him that, wouldn't you? Oh, yes. And we exchanged there in the stillness a sound of the oddest amusement. Then I went on. At all events, while he was with the man, Miss Flora was with the woman, it suited them all. It suited me too, I felt only too well, by which I mean that it suited exactly the particularly deadly view I was in the very act of forbidding myself to entertain. But I so far succeeded in checking the expression of this view that I will throw just here no further light on it than may be offered by the mention of my final observation to Mrs. Gross. His having lied and being impudent are, I confess, less engaging specimens than I had hoped to have from you at the outbreak in him of the little natural man. Still, I mused, They must do, for they make me feel more than ever that I must watch. It made me blush the next minute to see in my friend's face how much more unreservedly she had forgiven him than her anecdote struck me as presenting to my own tenderness an occasion for doing. This came out when at the schoolroom door she quitted me. Surely you don't accuse him of carrying on an intercourse that he conceals from me. Ah, remember that, until further evidence, I now accuse nobody. Then, before shutting her out to go by another passage to her own place, I must just wait, I wound up. Chapter 9. I waited and waited, and the days as they elapsed took something from my consternation. A very few of them, in fact, passing in constant sight of my pupils without a fresh incident, sufficed to give to grievous fancies and even to odious memories a kind of brush of the sponge. I have spoken of the surrender to their extraordinary childish grace as a thing I could actively cultivate, and it may be imagined, if I neglected now to address myself to this source for whatever it would yield. Stranger than I can express, certainly, was the effort to struggle against my new lights. It would doubtless have been, however, a great attention still, had it not been so frequently successful. I used to wonder how my little charges could help guessing that I thought strange things about them, and the circumstances that these things only made them more interesting was not by itself a direct aid to keeping them in the dark. I trembled lest they should see that they were so immensely more interesting. Putting things at the worst, at all events, as in meditation I so often did, any clouding of their innocence could only be, blameless and foredoomed as they were, a reason the more for taking risks. There were moments when by an irresistible impulse I found myself catching them up and pressing them to my heart. As soon as I had done so, I used to say to myself, "What will I think of that? Doesn't it betray too much?" It would have been easy to get into a sad, wild tangle about how much I might betray, but the real account, I feel, of the hours of peace that I could still enjoy was that the immediate charm of my companions was a beguilement still effective, even under the shadow of the possibility that it was studied. For, if it occurred to me that I might occasionally excite suspicion by the little outbreaks of my sharper passion for them, so too I remember wondering if I mightn't see a queerness in the traceable increase of their own demonstrations. They were at this period extravagantly and preternaturally fond of me, which, after all I could reflect, was no more than a graceful response in children perpetually bowed over and hugged. The homage of which they were so lavish succeeded, in truth, for my nerves quite as well as if I never appeared to myself, as I may say, literally to catch them at a purpose in it. They had never, I think, wanted to do so many things for their poor protectress. I mean, though they got their lessons better and better, which was naturally what would please her most, in the way of diverting, entertaining, surprising her, reading her passages, telling her stories, acting her charades, pouncing out at her in disguises as animals and historical characters, and above all, by astonishing her by the pieces they had secretly got by heart and could interminably recite. I should never get to the bottom, were I to let myself go even now, of the prodigious private commentary, all under still more private correction, with which in these days I overscored their full hours. They had shown me from the first a facility for everything, a general faculty which, taking a fresh start, achieved remarkable flights. They got their little tasks as if they loved them, and indulged from the mere exuberance of the gift in the most unimposed little miracles of memory. They not only popped out at me as tigers and as Romans, but as Shakespeareans, astronomers, and navigators. This was so singularly the case that it had presumably much to do with the fact as to which, at the present day, I am at a loss for a different explanation. I allude to my unnatural composure on the subject of another school for miles. What I remember is that I was content not, for the time, to open the question, and that contentment must have sprung from the sense of his perpetually striking show of cleverness. He was too clever for a bad governess, for a parson's daughter to spoil. And the strangest, if not the brightest thread in the pensive embroidery I just spoke of was the impression I might have got, if I had dared to work it out, that he was under some influence operating in his small intellectual life as a tremendous incitement. If it was easy to reflect, however, that such a boy could postpone school, it was at least as marked that for such a boy to have been kicked out by a schoolmaster was a mystification without end. Let me add that in their company now, and I was careful almost never to be out of it, I could follow no scent very far. We lived in a cloud of music and love and success and private theatricals. The musical sense in each of the children was of the quickest, but the elder in especial had a marvellous knack of catching and repeating. The schoolroom piano broke into all gruesome fancies, and when that failed, there were confabulations in corners, with a sequel of one of them going out in the highest spirits in order to come in as something new. I had had brothers myself, and it was no revelation to me that little girls could be slavish idolaters of little boys. What surpassed everything was that there was a little boy in the world who could have for the inferior age, sex, and intelligence so fine a consideration. They were extraordinarily at one, and to say that they never either quarrelled or complained is to make the note of praise coarse for their quality of sweetness. Sometimes, indeed, when I dropped into coarseness, I perhaps came across traces of little understandings between them by which one of them should keep me occupied, while the other slipped away. There is a naive side, I suppose, in all diplomacy, but if my pupils practised upon me, it was surely with the minimum of grossness. It was all in the other quarter that after a lull, the grossness broke out. I find that I really hang back, but I must take my plunge. In going on with the record of what was hideous at Bly, I not only challenged the most liberal faith, for which I little care, but, and this is another matter, I renew what I myself suffered. I again pushed my way through it to the end. There came suddenly an hour after which, as I look back, the affair seems to me to have been all pure suffering, but I have at least reached the heart of it, and the straightest road out is doubtless to advance. One evening, with nothing to lead up or to prepare it, I felt the cold touch of the impression that had breathed on me the night of my arrival, and which much lighter then, as I have mentioned, I should probably have made little of in memory, had my subsequent sojourn been less agitated. I had not gone to bed. I sat reading by a couple of candles. There was a room full of old books at Bly, last-century fiction, some of it, which, to the extent of a distinctly deprecated renown, but never to so much as that of a stray specimen, had reached the sequestered home and appealed to the unavowed curiosity of my youth. I remember that the book I had in my hand was Fielding's Amelia, and also that I was wholly awake. I recall further both the general conviction that it was horribly late and a particular objection to looking at my watch. I figure, finally, that the white curtain draping in the fashion of those days, the head of Flora's little bed, shrouded, as I had assured myself long before, the perfection of childish rest. I recollect, in short, that though I was deeply interested in my author, I found myself, at the turn of a page, and with his spell all scattered, looking straight up from him, and hard at the door of my room. There was a moment during which I listened, reminded of the faint sense I had had the first night of there being something undefinably astir in the house, and noted the soft breath of the open casement just move the half-drawn blind. Then, with all the marks of a deliberation that must have seemed magnificent had there been anyone to admire it, I laid down my book, rose to my feet, and taking a candle, went straight out of the room and from the passage, on which my light made little impression, noiselessly closed and locked the door. I can say now neither what determined nor what guided me, but I went straight along the lobby, holding my candle high, till I came within sight of the tall window that presided over the great turn of the staircase. At this point I precipitately found myself aware of three things. They were practically simultaneous, yet they had flashes of succession. My candle, under a bold flourish, went out, and I perceived by the uncovered window that the yielding dusk of earliest morning rendered it unnecessary. Without it, the next instant I saw that there was someone on the stair. I speak of sequences, but I required no lapse of seconds to stiffen myself for a third encounter with Quint. The apparition had reached the landing halfway up, and was therefore on the spot nearest the window, where at sight of me it stopped short and fixed me exactly as it had fixed me from the tower and from the garden. He knew me as well as I knew him, and so, in the cold, faint twilight, with a glimmer in the high glass and another on the polish of the oak stair below, we faced each other in our common intensity. He was absolutely, on this occasion, a living, detestable, dangerous presence. But that was not the wonder of wonders. I reserved this distinction for quite another circumstance, the circumstance that dread had unmistakably quieted me, and that there was nothing in me there that didn't meet and measure him. I had plenty of anguish after that extraordinary moment, but I had, thank God, no terror, and he knew I had not. I found myself at the end of an instant magnificently aware of this. I felt, in a fierce rigour of confidence, that if I stood my ground a minute I should cease, for the time at least, to have him to reckon with. And during the minute, accordingly, the thing was as human and hideous as a real interview, hideous just because it was human as to have met alone in the small hours in a sleeping house some enemy, some adventurer, some criminal. It was the dead silence of our long gaze at such close quarters that gave the whole horror, huge as it was, its only note of the unnatural. If I had met a murderer in such a place and at such an hour, we still at least would have spoken. Something would have passed in life between us. If nothing had passed, one of us would have moved. The moment was so prolonged that it would have taken but a little more to make me doubt if even I were in life. I can't express what followed it, save by saying that silence itself, which was indeed in a manner an attestation of my strength, became the element into which I saw the figure disappear, in which I definitely saw it turn, as I might have seen the low wretch to which it had once belonged turn on receipt of an order, and pass, with my eyes on the villainous back that no hunch could have more disfigured, straight down the staircase and into the darkness in which the next bend was lost. Chapter 10. I remained a while at the top of the stair, but with the effect presently of understanding that when my visitor had gone, he had gone. Then I returned to my room. The foremost thing I saw there by the light of the candle I had left burning was that Flora's little bed was empty, and on this I caught my breath with all the terror that 5 minutes before I had been able to resist. I dashed at the place in which I had left her lying, and over which, for the small silk counterpane and the sheets were disarranged, the white curtains had been deceivingly pulled forward. Then my step, to my unutterable relief, produced an answering sound. I perceived an agitation of the window blind, and the child, ducking down, emerged rosily from the other side of it. She stood there in so much of her candour and so little of her nightgown, with her pink bare feet and the golden glow of her curls. She looked intensely grave, and I had never had such a sense of losing an advantage acquired, the thrill of which had just been so prodigious, as on my consciousness that she addressed me with a reproach. "You naughty! Where have you been?" Instead of challenging her own irregularity, I found myself arraigned and explaining. She herself explained, for the matter, with the loveliest eager simplicity. She had known suddenly as she lay there that I was out of the room, and had jumped up to see what had become of me. I had dropped with the joy of her reappearance back into my chair, feeling then and then only a little faint, and she had pattered straight over to me, thrown herself upon my knee, given herself to be held with the flame of the candle full in the wonderful little face that was still flushed with sleep. I remember closing my eyes an instant, yieldingly, consciously, as before the excess of something beautiful that shone out of the blue of her own. "You were looking for me out of the window," I said. "You thought I might be walking in the grounds." "Well, I thought someone was." She never blanched as she smiled out that at me. Oh, how I looked at her now. "And did you see anyone?" "Ah, no," she returned, almost with the full privilege of childish inconsequence, resentfully, though, with a long sweetness and a little drawl of the negative. At that moment, in the state of my nerves, I absolutely believed she lied. And if I once more closed my eyes, it was before the dazzle of the 3 or 4 possible ways in which I might take this up. One of these, for a moment, tempted me with such singular intensity that to withstand it I must have gripped my little girl with a spasm that wonderfully she submitted to without a cry or a sign of fright. Why not break out at her on the spot and have it all over? Give it to her straight in her lovely little light face. You see, you know that you do, and that you already quite suspect I believe it, therefore why not frankly confess it to me, so that we may at least live with it together and learn perhaps in the strangeness of our fate where we are and what it means. This solicitation dropped, alas, as it came to me. If I could immediately have succumbed to it, I might have spared myself, well, you'll see what. Instead of succumbing, I sprang again to my feet, looked at her bed, and took a helpless middle way. "Why did you pull the curtain over the place to make me think you were still there?" Flora luminously considered, after which, with her divine little smile, "Because I don't like to frighten you. But if I had, by your idea, gone out—" She absolutely declined to be puzzled. She turned her eyes to the flame of the candle as if the question were as irrelevant, or at any rate as impersonal, as Mrs. Marset or 9 times 9. "Oh, but you know," she quite adequately answered, "that you might come back, you dear, and that you have." And after a little while, when she had got into bed, I had for a long time, by almost sitting on her to hold her hand, to prove that I recognized the pertinence of my return. You may imagine the general complexion from that moment of my nights. I repeatedly sat up until I didn't know when. I selected moments when my roommate unmistakably slept, and stealing out, took noiseless turns in the passage and even pushed as far to where I had last met Quint. But I never met him there again. And I may as well say at once that I on no other occasion saw him in the house. I just missed on the staircase, on the other hand, a different adventure. Looking down it from the top, I at once recognized the presence of a woman seated on one of the lower steps with her back presented to me, her body half bowed and her head, in an attitude of woe, in her hands. I had been there but an instant, however, when she vanished without looking round at me. I knew, nonetheless, exactly what dreadful face she had to show, and I wondered whether, if instead of being above I had been below, I should have had for going up the same nerve I had lately shown Quint. Well, there continued to be plenty of chance for nerve. On the 11th night, after my latest encounter with that gentleman, they were all numbered now. I had an alarm that perilously skirted it, and that indeed, from the particular quality of its unexpectedness, proved quite my sharpest shock. It was precisely the first night during this series that, weary with watching, I had felt that I might again without laxity lay myself down at my old hour. I slept immediately, and as I afterwards knew, till about 1 o'clock. But when I woke it was to sit straight up, as completely roused, as if a hand had shook me. I had left a light burning, but it was now out, and I felt an instant certainty that Flora had extinguished it. This brought me to my feet and straight in the darkness to her bed, which I found she had left. A glance at the window enlightened me further, and the striking of a match completed the picture. The child had again got up, this time blowing out the taper, and had again, for some purpose of observation or response, squeezed in behind the blind, and was peering out into the night. That she now saw, as she had not, I had satisfied myself the previous time, was proved to me by the fact that she was disturbed neither by my re-illumination nor by the haste I made to get into slippers and into a wrap. Hidden, protected, absorbed, she evidently rested on the sill, the casement opened forward, and gave herself up. There was a great still moon to help her, and this fact had counted in my quick decision. She was face to face with the apparition we had met at the lake, and could now communicate with it, as she had not then been able to do. What I on my side had to care for was, without disturbing her, to reach from the corridor some other window in the same quarter. I got to the door without her hearing me. I got out of it, closed it, and listened from the other side for some sound from her. While I stood in the passage, I had my eyes on her brother's door, which was but 10 steps off, and which indescribably produced in me a renewal of the strange impulse that I lately spoke of as my temptation. What if I should go straight in and march to his window? What if, by risking to his boyish bewilderment a revelation of my motive, I should throw across the rest of the mystery the long halter of my boldness? This thought held me sufficiently to make me cross to his threshold and pause again. I preternaturally listened. I figured to myself what might portentously be. I wondered if his bed were also empty, and he too was secretly at watch. It was a deep, soundless minute, at the end of which my impulse failed. He was quiet. He might be innocent. The risk was hideous. I turned away. There was a figure in the grounds, a figure prowling for a sight, the visitor with whom Flora was engaged, but it was not the visitor most concerned with my boy. I hesitated afresh, but on other grounds and only for a few seconds. Then I had made my choice. There were empty rooms at Bly, and it was only a question of choosing the right one. The right one suddenly presented itself to me as the lower one, though high above the gardens, in the solid corner of the house that I have spoken of as the old tower. This was a large square chamber, arranged with some state as a bedroom, the extravagant size of which made it so inconvenient that it had not for years, though kept by Mrs. Gross in exemplary order, been occupied. I had often admired it, and I knew my way about in it. I had only, after just faltering at the first chill gloom of its disuse, to pass across it and unbolt as quietly as I could one of the shutters. Achieving this transit, I uncovered the glass without a sound, and applying my face to the pane was able, the darkness without being much less than within, to see that I commanded the right direction. Then I saw something more. The moon made the night extraordinarily penetrable, and showed me on the lawn a person, diminished my distance, who stood there motionless and as if fascinated, looking up to where I had appeared, looking, that is, not so much straight at me, as at something that was apparently above me. There was clearly another person above me. There was a person on the tower, but the presence on the lawn was not in the least what I had conceived and had confidently hurried to meet. The presence on the lawn, I felt sick as I made it out, was poor little Miles himself. Chapter 11. It was not till late the next day that I spoke to Mrs. Gross. The rigour with which I kept my pupils in sight making it often difficult to meet her privately, and the more as we each felt the importance of not provoking, on the part of the servants quite as much as on that of the children, any suspicion of a secret flurry or that of a discussion of mysteries. I drew great security in this particular from her mere smooth aspect. There was nothing in her fresh face to pass on to others my horrible confidences. She believed me, I was sure, absolutely. If she hadn't, I don't know what would have become of me, for I couldn't have borne the business alone. But she was a magnificent monument to the blessing of a want of imagination, and if she could see in our little charges nothing but their beauty and amiability, their happiness and cleverness, she had no direct communication with the sources of my trouble. If they had been at all visibly blighted or battered, she would doubtless have grown on tracing it back haggard enough to match them. As matters stood, however, I could feel her when she surveyed them, with her large white arms folded and the habit of serenity in all her look, thanked the Lord's mercy that if they were ruined, the pieces would still serve. Flights of fancy gave place in her mind to a steady fireside glow, and I had already begun to perceive how, with the development of the conviction that, as time went on without a public accident, our young things could, after all, look out for themselves, she addressed her greatest solicitude to the sad case presented by their instructress. That, for myself, was a sound simplification. I could engage that, to the world, my face should tell no lies, but it would have been, in the conditions, an immense added strain to find myself anxious about hers. At the hour I now speak of, she had joined me under pressure on the terrace, where, with the lapse of the season, the afternoon sun was now agreeable, and we sat there together while before us, at a distance, but within call if we wished, the children strolled to and fro in one of their most manageable moods. They moved slowly in unison below us over the lawn, the boy as they went reading aloud from a storybook and passing his arm around his sister to keep her quite in touch. Mrs. Gross watched them with positive placidity. Then I caught the suppressed intellectual creak with which she conscientiously turned to take from me a view of the back of the tapestry. I had made her a receptacle of lurid things, but there was an odd recognition of my superiority, my accomplishments, and my function in her patience under my pain. She offered her mind to my disclosures as, had I wished to mix a witch's broth and proposed it with assurance, she would have held out a large, clean saucepan. This had become thoroughly her attitude by the time that, in my recital of the events of the night, I reached the point of what Miles had said to me, when, after seeing him at such a monstrous hour, almost on the very spot where he happened now to be, I had gone down to bring him in, choosing then, at the window, with a concentrated need of not alarming the house, rather that method than a signal more resonant. I had left her meanwhile in little doubt of my small hope of representing with success, even to her actual sympathy, my sense of the real splendour of the little inspiration with which, after I had got him into the house, the boy met my final articulate challenge. As soon as I appeared in the moonlight on the terrace, he had come to me as straight as possible, on which I had taken his hand without a word, and led him through the dark spaces, up the staircase where Quint had so hungrily hovered for him, along the lobby where I had listened and trembled, and so to his forsaken room. Not a sound on the way had passed between us, and I had wondered, oh, how I had wondered, if he were groping about in his little mind for something plausible and not too grotesque. It would tax his invention, certainly, and I felt this time, over his real embarrassment, a curious thrill of triumph. It was a sharp trap for the inscrutable. He couldn't play any longer at innocence. So how the deuce would he get out of it? There, beating me indeed with the passionate throb of this question, an equal dumb appeal as to how the deuce I should. I was confronted at last, as never yet, with all the risk attached even now to sounding my own horrid note. I remember, in fact, that as we pushed into his little chamber, where the bed had not been slept in at all, and the window, uncovered to the moonlight, made the place so clear that there was no need of striking a match. I remembered how I suddenly dropped, sank upon the edge of the bed from the force of the idea that he must know how he really, as they say, had me. He could do what he liked with all his cleverness to help him, so long as I should continue to defer to the old tradition of the criminality of those caretakers of the young who minister to superstitions and fears. He had me indeed, and in a cleft stick, for who would ever absolve me? Who would consent that I should go unhung, if, by the faintest tremor of an overture, I were the first to introduce into our perfect intercourse an element so dire? No, no. It was useless to attempt to convey it to Mrs. Gross, just as it is scarcely less so to attempt to suggest here how, in our short, stiff brush in the dark, he fairly shook me with admiration. I was, of course, thoroughly kind and merciful. Never yet had I placed on his little shoulders hands of such tenderness as those with which, while I rested against the bed, I held him there, well under the fire. I had no alternative but, in form at least, to put it to him. You must tell me now, and all the truth. What did you go out for? What were you doing there? I can still see his wonderful smile. The whites of his beautiful eyes and the uncovering of his little teeth shine to me in the dusk. If I tell you why, will you understand? My heart at this leapt into my mouth. Would he tell me why? I found no sound on my lips to press it, and I was aware of replying only with a vague, repeated, grimacing nod. He was gentleness itself, and while I wagged my head at him, he stood there more than ever a little fairy prince. It was his brightness indeed that gave me a respite. Would it be so great if he were really going to tell me? Well, he said, at last, just exactly in order that you should do this. Do what? Think me, for a change, bad. I shall never forget the sweetness and gaiety with which he brought out the word, nor how on top of it he bent forward and kissed me. It was practically the end of everything. I met his kiss, and I had to make, while I folded him for a minute in my arms, the most stupendous effort not to cry. He had given exactly the account of himself that permitted least of my going behind it, and it was only with the effect of confirming my acceptance of it that as I presently glanced about the room I could say, "Then you didn't undress at all?" He fairly glittered in the gloom. "Not at all. I sat up and read." "And when did you go down?" "At midnight. When I'm bad, I am bad." I see, it's charming, but how could you be sure I wouldn't know it? Oh, I arranged that with Flora. His answers rang out with a readiness. She was to get up and look out, which is what she did do. It was I who fell into the trap. So she disturbed you, and to see what she was looking at, you also looked. You saw. While you, I concurred, caught your death in the night air. He literally bloomed so from this exploit that he could afford radiantly to assent. How otherwise should I have been bad enough, he asked. Then, after another embrace, the incident and our interview closed on my recognition of all the reserves of goodness that for his joke he had been able to draw upon. Chapter 12. The particular impression I had received proved in the morning light, I repeat, not quite successfully presentable to Mrs. Grose, though I reinforced it with the mention of still another remark that he had made before we separated. It all lies in half a dozen words, I said to her, words that really settle the matter. Think, you know, what I might do. He threw that off to show me how good he is. He knows down to the ground what he might do. That's what he gave them a taste of at school. Lord, you do change, cried my friend. I don't change, I simply make it out. The four, depend upon it, perpetually meet. If on either of these last nights you had been with either child, you would have clearly understood. The more I've watched and waited, the more I felt that if there were nothing else to make it sure, it would be made so by the systematic silence of each. Never, by a slip of the tongue, have they so much as alluded to either of their old friends, any more than Miles has alluded to his expulsion. Oh yes, we may sit here and look at them, and they may show off to us there to their fill, but even while they pretend to be lost in their fairy tale, they're steeped in their vision of the dead restored. He's not reading to her, I declared. They're talking of them. They're talking horrors. I go on, I know, as if I were crazy, and it's a wonder I'm not. What I've seen would have made you so, but it has only made me more lucid, made me get hold of still other things. My lucidity must have seemed awful, but the charming creatures who were victims of it, passing and repassing in their interlocked sweetness, gave my colleague something to hold on by. And I felt how tight she held, as without stirring in the breath of my passion, she covered them still with her eyes. Of what other things have you got hold? Why, of the very things that have delighted, fascinated, and yet at bottom, as I now so strangely see, mystified and troubled me. They're more than earthly beauty. They're absolutely unnatural goodness. It's a game, I went on. It's a policy and a fraud. on the part of little darlings, as yet mere lovely babies. Yes, mad as that seems. The very act of bringing it out really helped me to trace it, follow it all up and piece it all together. They haven't been good. They've only been absent. It has been easy to live with them because they're simply leading a life of their own. They're not mine. They're not ours. They're his. And they're hers. Quince and that woman's. Quince and that woman's. They want to get rid of them. Oh, how at this poor Mrs. Gross appeared to study them. But for what? For the love of all the evil that in those dreadful days the pair put them into, and to ply them with that evil still, to keep up the work of demons is what brings the others back. Laws, said my friend under her breath. The exclamation was homely, but it revealed a real acceptance of my further proof of what, in the bad time, for there had been a worse even than this, must have occurred. There could have been no such justification for me as the plain assent of her experience to whatever depth of depravity I found credible in our brace of scoundrels.
I hope you felt every word of this journey, just as deeply as I felt telling it to you. If you want to stay part of the story, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Something even more captivating is already on its way. Until next time.